War of the Gargantuas is a 1966 Toho Kaiju epic that has shaped the genre since its original release. It's a cult classic, and besides the original Godzilla, it is, in my opinion, the quintessential kaiju movie ever made. A movie that is schlocky and crazy, full of great monster action and beautiful miniature effects. But also a movie with a heart, one largely brought about by director Ishiro Honda's intervention with the story. But I have a bone to pick with this movie. No, it's not that it's a loose sequel to Frankenstein Conquers the World. No, it's not Russ Tamblyn's lackluster and medicated performance. It's what version of this movie is readily available.
Hello everyone, I'm Adam Noyce, and welcome to AN Productions, a channel where we discuss military history, film history, and history in general. Today, we're talking film history for one of my personal favorite films of all time, War of the Gargantuas.
Ever since Janus Films started buying up the rights to many of Toho's classic science fiction monster films, there has been a distressing issue befalling many of these movies, most notably the movies from the 1950s through the mid-1960s. Many times, these kaiju movies would be retooled and re-edited for general audiences here in the United States. The most extreme examples can be found with the original Godzilla, the American version inserting Raymond Burr into the movie, or Varan, the Unbelievable, doing much the same thing. King Kong vs. Godzilla would insert US reporters discussing the events unfolding on screen, but these are outliers. For the most part, these movies were retooled with economics in mind, focusing on dubbing and general restructuring of the movie itself. Why did American distributors do this? Why would they tamper with the original vision of the movie in question? Well, when Toho got wind that their movies were becoming very popular overseas, they began implementing their own ready-made dubs for their movies. These often being referred to as international dubs, or the frontier dubs.
These dubs were serviceable at best, and oftentimes the American producers watched these dubbed versions of the movies and just outright passed them up. But they still wanted the movie nevertheless because they smelled money. So they would often bring these movies to their own dubbing studios and then revoice them into English. These studios would usually produce a vastly superior dub, which used real actors and voice talent.
Most notable of these studios was Titra, which would later become Titan Studios. They were responsible for many of the classic dubs most of us grew up with, for not just the Godzilla franchise, but Gamera as well. Movies like the original Mothra, Mothra vs. Godzilla, Frankenstein Conquers the World, Ebirah, Horror of the Deep, Son of Godzilla, Destroy All Monsters, and Godzilla vs. Hedorah. But there were other dubbing studios as well. There was one company who provided the dubs for Battle in Outer Space, Gamera vs. Barugan, and Yongari, Monster from the Deep. These had subpar results.
Yet other than Titra, one studio that really excelled with their dubs was Glen Studios, which would do the US dubs for Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, and of course, War of the Gargantuas. Now here is where the retooling comes into play.
The US editors would look for ways to restructure the film to best make the lip movements of the original footage, and then try to match it with the new English script. Many of the changes came about by either getting around the lip movement, by trimming some frames here and there, cutting a reaction shot here, and often tightening the scene to best make it appear the dub was the original language of the film. This is what often made the dubs of these early movies so successful, and so good. It was something close to the original Japanese movie, but slightly different.
Now how does this all play into my problem with War of the Gargantuas? Well, as I said before, it is the version that is readily available.
These re-edited US versions are largely gone now from official media. Lost. Erased by Toho, who has made it very clear they want their version of the movie to be the version of the movie. And they are certainly within their right to do so. Despite Toho being the definition of a corporate machine in this period, there was still some semblance of artistic integrity here, and evidently seeing their movies altered in such ways never really rubbed them the right way. Remember, Ishiro Honda was by far the most successful and profitable Japanese director until Hayao Miyazaki. Toho rightfully had pride in their kaiju and science fiction movies and how successful they were. Well, one solution to this problem was getting an American distributor involved during the actual production process. Mothra did this with Columbia Pictures, and yet Columbia still altered their movie, though only with minor edits to hasten the movie's pacing. They would also have Toho shoot a whole new final act to make it more Western.
But it wasn't until one man entered the picture did this notion of Americans directly becoming involved with Toho's productions truly manifest itself. This man was Henry G. Sapterstein.
A cigar-smoking independent movie merchandiser, Henry G. Sapterstein was responsible for working with Elvis Presley, the Three Stooges, and many more, creating innovative ways to merchandise movies and their characters. But he always wanted to be a movie producer. He found this opportunities when he bought United Pictures of America, UPA. He rapidly became responsible for several very successful TV shows, such as Mr. Magoo, The Untouchables, and The Dick Tracy Show. In many ways, the kind of stuff Sapterstein was looking for and wanting to make reminded me of a mixture of American International Pictures mixed with the more family-orientated content of Rankin Bass Productions.
He grew very interested in monster movies, seeing as they were very profitable and exportable, so he went on the hunt. Who made monster movies, and who made them relatively economically? Well, Toho fit that mold almost perfectly.
Sapterstein was unlike other U.S. distributors and producers who had worked with Toho in the past. For the most part, like with Columbia Pictures, they would give Toho some notes and requirements, but that was it. Instead, Sapterstein took a very hands-on approach. He learned Japanese and Japanese etiquette, traveled to Japan frequently, and arguably the most impactful element of his involvement was getting American actors to appear in these monster movies. Nick Adams was selected to play in 2 of these movies UPA and Toho collaborated with. They were Frankenstein Conquers the World and Monster Zero. But for some reason, despite being proposed as a sequel, War of the Gargantuas would hire Russ Tamblyn to play the role of Dr. Stuart. Originally, the role was to be played by up-and-comer Tab Hunter, but he was replaced during pre-production for reasons unknown. One cannot help but wonder if War of the Gargantuas would have benefited from Tab's performance instead of Russ Tamblyn's.
Maybe if we don't ask so many questions and just try to find a few clues, we might discover the answers together.
There's a lot of controversy with Russ Tamblyn and his role in War of the Gargantuas. Tamblyn would deny his revile for the movie, but many of the Japanese cast and crew, along with Sapterstein himself, found him to be a very difficult man to work with. A sharp contrast to Nick Adams, who embraced his roles in these movies with open arms and enthusiasm, while Tamblyn appears to have thought himself better than to be relegated to a B-picture monster movie. Ishiro Honda's assistant, Seiji Tani, said, quote, "Honda-san had to hold back and bear so much during this one. Tamblyn was such an asshole." Likewise, Sapterstein referred to Tamblyn as, quote, "a royal pain in the ass." Tamblyn hated his lines, and often would improvise his own quips despite the protests of Ishiro Honda, a man known for sticking to the scripts and avoiding such improvisations. He often would do the exact opposite of what Honda would direct him to do, causing great consternation with the crew and alienating Tamblyn from his Japanese co-stars. Again, a significant departure from their experiences with Nick Adams. And it shows. Nick Adams gave 2 great performances that were both over the top, but not comically so. He was also charming in both roles as Dr. Bowman in Frankenstein Conquers the World and Glenn in Monster Zero. Tamblyn sleeps through his role, looking rather medicated and bored throughout, no matter what was happening on screen. Upon the film's completion, Toho again produced their own dub of the movie and presented it to Sapterstein. This dub had never been released outside of Japan prior to 2017, and it is this version of the movie that is currently available on most streaming platforms, including YouTube.
It is a terrible dub. Russ Tamblyn was awkwardly dubbed by a different voice actor, and most of the voices just do not match the characters they represent, nor do they complement the action which is taking place on screen.
The 2 monsters are known to be near brothers, and if one is a killer, so could the other be.
And above all that, the audio quality is terrible. It's garbled and scratchy.
which is difficult to swallow considering the print is in HD. The print used as well is also not the best, with a dark green hue over the whole thing, which makes some of the darker scenes completely unwatchable. And this is the version now most readily available in the United States. Not even the original language with English subtitles, but this horrific dub that undermines the movie in almost every way, shape, and form.
Akimi! Akimi! I'll be right there!
In fact, some of the comments are absolutely hysterical, especially from the older folks. This is not the version they watched growing up. And it's pretty universally agreed that this dub is awful.
Well, what is this version they grew up with? Well, that version is the version I grew up seeing as well, as it played on television frequently. This was the UPA cut, personally overseen by Henry G. Sapterstein.
We interrupt your normal broadcast to bring you this brief message. A&P is proud to have become a History Fix affiliate. History Fix is a streaming service for history nerds like you and me. This includes some of our own productions, such as the uncut and uncensored version of our documentary on the Battle at Remagen, along with our short documentary breaking down the Boston Massacre moment by moment. So head on over using either the link on your screen right now, or by scanning the QR code, and save 30% off the annual subscription price by using the promo code 30% off. Thank you, and let's keep history alive.
Sapterstein took one look at the dub and said, "No thank you." He watched the original Japanese cut and thought Russ Tamblyn wasn't in it enough. So he had Toho and Ishiro Honda reshoot several sequences in the opening to now include Dr. Stuart, while originally they featured the police inspector, played by Yoshifumi Tajima. Sapterstein and his editor would use these scenes in his version of the film. Toho also provided Sapterstein all the sound effects, negatives, and music used in the Japanese version to play with. This allowed Sapterstein to add a few establishing shots not seen in the Japanese version. It also adds a couple of new shots of Sanda, the brown Gargantua, during the creature's first entrance. In fact, say what you will about the merits of re-editing the original movie, but inserting these two shots of Sanda, in my opinion, greatly improved the sequence, building up the brown Gargantua before we see him in full, while in the Japanese version it is just a hard cut to a wide shot, and there he is. Other changes were some sound effects. Gaira is given more footsteps in the UPA version than the near-silent Japanese version. This was also done for Godzilla's dance in Monster Zero. This is another example of a change I would genuinely agree with. But the biggest change comes in the music department. Featured prominently throughout the Japanese version of War of the Gargantuas is a military march composed by Akira Ifukube, the godfather of movie monster scores. I rather like this march. It's not too fast like what we saw in both The Mysterians and Battle in Outer Space when compared to the slow action on screen, nor is it overly slow. It perfectly matches the operations unfolding within the movie.
Sapterstein did not like Ifukube's marches. In fact, it seems most US distributors didn't like his marches, seeing as most were removed in these early kaiju flicks, most notably the one used in Battle in Outer Space.
Sapterstein would remove Ifukube's marches and replace it with a stock track, not composed by Ifukube, but called Terror Hunt, composed by Philip Green. He would also lift bits of the Gargantua theme used in other tracks as well. But also he'd use some of the score from Monster Zero, most notably during the final battle.
Sapterstein also did this with Monster Zero, replacing Ifukube's military marches with other cues used within the soundtrack, most notably the opening credits.
Terror Hunt would also be used during the Gargantua's first and final clashes, which greatly changes the overall tone of the sequence. In typical Ishiro Honda fashion, the Japanese version plays a rather somber track composed by Akira Ifukube, which helps sell the overall tragedy of the Gargantuas themselves. The UPA uses Terror Hunt, which makes the clashes a much more epic spectacle, rather than a tragedy itself. War of the Gargantuas was also originally made with it being a sequel to Frankenstein Conquers the World, but Sapterstein changed this, perhaps as a means to distance the movie from that previous film, which had been taken from his hands for distribution by American International Pictures. Many have argued this actually fixes the continuity issues between the two movies, thus improving the overall final product. I don't know if I agree with this assessment, but I certainly understand it. Then, on top of it all, Sapterstein went to Glenn Studios to make a whole new dub of the film. And it's a great dub. It's cartoonish without being overly so. In fact, I'd argue that Glenn dubs for this and Monster Zero are some of the best dubs ever made, using true voice talent that believably matches the characters being portrayed. It also features Russ Tamblyn's own voice, which leads to more problems.
It's not just a theory that the brown gargantua is a harmless creature, it's a fact. A plain and simple fact that's already been proven.
It's not a theory that the old one's harmless. It's a plain and established fact. There's no record of him hurting anyone, is there?
Russ Tamblyn doesn't just look medicated, but sounds it too. And there are some conflicting stories as to the dubbing process for his scenes. The most known is that Sapterstein didn't have a script to use because Tamblyn largely improvised his lines. And by the time the dubbing process began, Tamblyn had forgotten all of his lines. I must note that the international dub made by Toho followed the lines of the original script, not necessarily what Tamblyn actually said. In 2004, at a screening for the movie, Tamblyn was the guest of honor. He explained that he resisted the changes made by Sapterstein, most notably the removal of any mentions of Frankenstein. These would lead to big clashes with voice director Ryfle Jackson. Tamblyn explains that he had to then re-improvise his improvised lines based only on memory and lip movement. Ryfle Jackson, however, remembers it differently. Tamblyn was resisting so bad, they tricked him into a mere cold read of all of his lines. They then recorded this cold read and used that as the final voiceover work, which is what we see in the movie.
I wonder why he's living in the ocean like they say he does.
Well, maybe he fell in love with a whale or something, I don't know.
I actually believe Ryfle Jackson's story a bit more, because to me it fits almost perfectly with what many of the cast and crew were saying about Russ Tamblyn during production.
But with all that being said and done, the UPA version wasn't released until 1970, 4 years after its initial production. But it has since entered the realms of cult cinema, and remains a classic beloved by many to this day here in the United States. People like Brad Pitt, Guillermo del Toro, even Quentin Tarantino, all sing of the movie's praises. And it is this UPA cut that I and most of America grew up with. However, the last release of this version was in the early 2000s on a DVD pack with Rodan, featuring the US version of both, along with the original Japanese versions. With very few exceptions, I'd agree with the general consensus that the Japanese versions of these movies are the superior versions. And I feel that way about War of the Gargantuas, though the editor in me likes some of the changes that UPA made. One I already commented on earlier, the inclusion of 2 shots of Sonda running toward Gyra to save him. But the other change I like really adds dramaticism to the overall opening of the movie. The Japanese version goes from the Toho logo right into the opening credits. The UPA cut goes from the UPA logo directly into the opening scene of the movie, featuring the giant octopus and Gyra's first appearance. Only then does it go to the opening credits. The whole sequence works as a fantastic teaser.
But I don't like the removal of Ifukube's military marches, nor the removal of his music during the actual fight scenes themselves. I love the tragedy of this film, and much of it comes through using Ifukube's score. Replacing it with Terror Hunt, while making it certainly more exciting, also greatly undermines that theme and tone of the original movie.
Since the early 2000s, this UPA version, along with most of the other US edits of these movies, have begun disappearing into memory, cast aside by Toho as irrelevant. But they aren't irrelevant. They are no less a part of the history of these movies, and one I wish would be preserved along with the Japanese versions. Warts and all. It wasn't the Japanese version Brad Pitt, Guillermo del Toro, and Quentin Tarantino grew up watching and influenced them. It was the UPA cut. While I truly admire the effort, it saddens me that preservation for these altered cuts have largely come from fans putting in their own time to make, quote, fan restorations. And it is largely because Toho has made it so no other version but their own can officially exist. And that's the problem I have.
Look, changes and re-edits aside, I know full well that if the international dub was the version I first watched when I was a kid, I wouldn't have fallen in love with this movie. I certainly would not hold it in such high regard as a masterpiece of kaiju cinema. In fact, I doubt I would like the movie at all, considering the dub is just so terrible. The quality of the sound is so embarrassingly low. In fact, some scenes are downright inaudible.
It was the UPA version that allowed me to fall in love with War of the Gargantuas. It is what sparked my imagination like no other kaiju movie had or has. It is what led me to the original versions to admire those as well. And that version of the movie is now just gone. Except to those who know where to look. Even if the version being streamed or available online was using the Japanese audio with English subtitles, I'm still left wondering, what's the point? It seems we, the fans, have all grown up and can appreciate the original language with subtitles. But what of the younger fans? What about the audiences that made Godzilla and this genre what it is? As I said before, if this international dub is what I watched growing up, I wouldn't have watched it, and I'd just have turned it off. And that is where the importance, at least here in America, of these alternative cuts enters the picture. While they don't match the original Japanese versions shot for shot, they are, overall, a superior product to the international dubs, which are shoddy at best.
It's kind of like Blade Runner, or actually Das Boot, for you guys who like military history content. There are multiple versions of those movies, and every version is readily available for consumption, but not with Toho's movies. And it's just downright sad to see such a cult classic relegated to using one of the worst dubs I have ever heard, when such a good one already exists. I hope you enjoyed this content. We have much more like it on my channel, and if you would like to see more, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Do all that fun jazz, and hit the like button, and certainly help the channel grow. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Sayonara.